The Herlock Sol. I am Skegivetter, and welcome to the Norse Code. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. Instead of talking about mythology or Norse paganism as a whole, I want to talk about one specific aspect of the practicing paganism that I think is really important. That's crafting. Specifically, a magical tool. I think crafting is really important in this faith because it's what our ancestors did. They couldn't go to Amazon or Etsy or a psychic fair or whatever and buy what they wanted. They had to make it themselves. So you kind of had to be crafty. You know, if they wanted a totem of Thor, they'd have to grab a knife and carve their own, which I did with this. So I wanted to start a whole series on crafting and give you some ideas, some tips and tricks I've learned along the way, kind of illustrate some of the things that I've done and that I'm currently working on. And this first episode of that, what I would like to do is go over magical tools. Now, when I first started getting into all this, it was more Wicca than Norse paganism, and so I made a wand. I was out hunting one day, and I came across a maple tree that had been struck by lightning, and it had all these big splinters poking out of it. And so I decided, that would be a really good piece of wood to make a wand out of. And I walked up to it and started tugging on a piece, and it wouldn't budge. So then I asked the tree if I could have it, and it popped right out. Came home, carved it up a little bit, sanded it down, did some wood burning on it, and then wrapped it in copper wire, and I have my wand. And I used this for quite a while before I really started getting into more of the paganism and started moving away from Wicca, but I keep this just in case. As I continued down this journey and started getting more into the shamanistic stuff, the druidic stuff, I felt for worship and magic, I needed a staff. That just felt like the right thing to have for me. So I made this bad boy. Oops. So this was a staff or a stick that I found on a hike one day, and I used it as a hiking stick for a good long time, and then repurposed it as my staff. This was a deer skull that was found out in the woods. It's got a bunch of feathers on it: goose, turkey, crow, blue jay. I have some cardinal feathers I'm going to add. I just haven't added them yet. Macaw feathers. I used to have a macaw, blue and gold macaw, so I added some of his feathers on here, and a couple other bones. There's a deer rib bone. There's a leg bone on here, and so I've been using this for practicing magic, doing rituals, and just general worship. One of the things that I like about having the staff is, obviously you can use it as a staff, you can move it around, you get some noise that goes with it, which I actually find to be quite helpful. I kind of really like this. Hitting it off the ground. It helps when doing like a little meditation. I think it's 4 times a second. It was 440 hertz, 400 hertz, something like that. Yeah, 4 times a second. It's 420 hertz. That's what I'm looking for. That's helps a lot of shamans fall into a meditative state. So you could do that with this. I'll also, if I'm invoking the gods, call out the god's name and then 3 bangs, and I'll do that 3 times. So you end up with 9 call-outs to the god and 9 bangs. But the issue with this, it's a little delicate. I don't want the skull to get hurt. I don't want to lose any of this stuff. So if I'm out in the woods, I don't want to take this. If I need to travel somewhere, I don't want to put this in the truck. I'd rather just stay here, do stuff in the backyard, do stuff here at the house, but I don't want to risk damaging this. So I decided I needed something a little stronger and less fragile. So I'm out hiking one day, and it was a day in which I got to speak with Freyr, which was kind of cool. And I came across a young sapling that had fallen. And it was laying mostly fallen over, the root ball still on it. And so I asked the forest if I could have it, and it popped right out of the ground. So I cleaned all the bark off, sanded it down, carved out a little area here where it's a little bit thinner, right where it's comfortable for my hand to be. And this, there's no adornments, there's nothing else to it, it's just a staff. And this, I can throw in the car, I can take in the woods, it's great. But I kind of want to have some adornment. And so, what I've been working on is, if it'll focus, is getting, why won't you focus? There we go. Adding in the name of the gods on the staff. So what I have here are 9 gods. Now, I didn't step out to do 9. That was not my intention. It just kind of happened that way, and considering 9 is a sacred number to the Norse, that's been quite advantageous. So I have on here, and these are all gods that I've worked with. I have Odin, Thor, Loki, and Fenrir up here in the top. They represent the Aesir. Here in the middle, I have Freya, Freyr, Skadi, and Ullr. And then I have non-Norse deity, Cernunnos, so that gives me 9. And this middle section represents the Vanir. I know, you're thinking, Ullr and Skadi are not Vanir, they are Aesir. Disagree. And I'll explain why in the next podcast video, because the next one I'm doing is on Skadi, so I'm going to go into detail why I believe Skadi should be considered Vanir and not Aesir. But, bottom line, these are all the gods that I've worked with or attempted to work with or have worked with me, through me, and so I added them to the staff, and it just happened to be the sacred number 9. So I kind of wanted to go through how I did this and give you some pointers on what you can do to do the same. So as I said, when I took this home from the woods, I got a knife and I kind of just went through and started chipping off the bark. This had dried out enough that the bark came off really easy, and then I just took some sandpaper and sanded it nice and smooth, got rid of all the splinters and the marks and everything from the knife. And then I started to sit down and lay out all of the bind runes. Now, I haven't done an episode on bind runes yet, and I will, but the basic 30-second synopsis of bind runes is you take runes and you put them together to form other symbols, and how you put them together doesn't really matter. It's more like what you're putting together to create a rune that means something else. In the case of these, they are the names of the gods done in runes. But a bind rune, like I said, it doesn't matter how you put it together, as long as it makes sense to what you're doing and what you're trying to make it mean. In this case, straight up and down was what I was going for. So you can see here that focus. There we go. So that's Thor. So you can see Thuraz, Tholo, and Radio all there, all in a line, and that continues through with Odin, Loki, and Fenrir. Some of them were a little easier to read than others, just due to the space constraints and how many runes went into each one. But, yeah, so I'm going to pop in some footage here of me laying these out. I just sat down at my workbench and started laying them out in a pleasing way. I had Odin, Thor, and Loki up on this top section, and that's when I realized it was Aesir and Vanir and then non-Norse. And so I went with that. It wasn't, again, not my intention. It just kind of happened that way, and that seems to be a consistent theme when you're doing crafting for this faith. Is you'll have all the plans in the world, but it doesn't matter. You're going to be led the right way, and you just got to follow it because there's a reason you're being led that way. Next step was I took my Dremel and I started carving out the letters. Now, a traditionalist will say, oh, you shouldn't use a Dremel, you should use a knife, a chisel, a V-gouge or something and carve them out. And typically I would agree with that. However, I try to be a little bit more practical than purely following the way it would have been done. And sometimes you just don't have the time for carving. You know, I can carve these, the totem that I showed you at the beginning. I carved those with a knife. You know, I can do it, but it's been a very busy year. Christmas is coming up, Yule is coming up, and I just don't have the time. So I use my Dremel. It took me about, let's say, a half hour to carve all these in. Now, if you're going to use a Dremel with a carving bit, you need to be very careful. Not only do you not want to hurt yourself, but you can very easily cut more than you intend to. It's better to do light passes, short passes, and go over them over and over again to get the depth you want, as opposed to risking it catching and going someplace you don't want it. Because once that wood's gone, it's gone. I also highly recommend getting one of these extensions that you see here on the screen that I'm using. This way you don't have to hold the whole bulky Dremel itself. You can just hold the smaller, Sharpie-sized piece, and makes it a whole lot easier to do your carving. If you really want to see some beautiful carving, check out the Nordic Wolf Custom Carving on Facebook. He's a good friend of mine, does amazing work. I'll be showcasing him and his work at some point this winter on the show. He's a real good guy. Next up, once everything was carved out, was I started to paint in the letters. You'll see I'm using red, and there's a reason for that. Traditionally, when making runes, you would cut out your pieces of fruit-bearing branch, and it has to be a fruit-bearing tree, traditionally. Carve out your letters and then paint them with your blood. What that does is it binds the runes to you, so that when you're doing your divinations and rituals and whatnot, it's specific to you and going to give you a much more personal result. I wanted to do that with these as well. However, that takes a lot of blood. A lot more than I'm willing to give. I don't like cutting myself. Most people probably don't. So an alternative is you can use red paint. I don't think it's as good, obviously, because you're not using your blood, but it kind of gives the same effect. Now, you could do what I did and have a little cap full of red paint, as you see here in the video. I did poke my finger and drop a few drops of my blood in there and mixed it up, so I am still painting with my blood, just a little bit of it spread out, as opposed to, entirely of blood. I didn't film that, I didn't show that, because YouTube's not too keen on showing blood and, purposely hurting yourself, which I mean, all I did was sterilize a needle and stick it into the tip of my finger and squeeze out a couple drops. It's not a big deal. But you just get a small brush and carefully paint in. You don't have to use red. It is a bit more traditional, but you could use other colors. You could use a color associated with each god. If you're only putting in runes, you can put in a color that's associated with the rune. It's entirely up to you. It's whether you're doing a wand, a staff, or something else. It's for you. It's got to be what you like, what works for you. So follow your muse, and if you're not sure what to do, meditate on it. Ask the gods what you should do. That's going to give you the best result. I'm just giving you a guideline based on what I know. So, now that everything's painted, I have 2 steps left that are not finished yet. And that is to put a finish on it. This is all raw wood. And if I'm going to be taking it out in the woods, it's going to be in contact with wet earth, especially the bottom end. It's going to be prone to rot. So you got to protect the wood somehow. And I have some friends who will tell you that you have to use a non-synthetic finish on it. Beeswax, linseed oil, shellac. Shellac's been shown to be used since ancient Egypt. Beeswax has been used since the dawn of time, for the most part. Even linseed oil and later boiled linseed oil, which boiled is the better one to use. That was not used during the Viking Age as far as we can tell, but it's natural, and it's been used since, Renaissance time at least. They're all natural. You can use those for sure. I do tend to try to stay away from the synthetics myself, but again, I'm practical. Sometimes that's not a great option. So polyurethane, lacquer, even a resin coating, it's up to you. I try to avoid that stuff where I can when I'm working on stuff for the faith. If I'm working on anything else, I'll use polyurethane and lacquer all day long. But for this stuff, nah, it's not for me. So I'm going to use boiled linseed oil on these. It's not Viking era specific, but it is still a very good finish. I use it on all my tool handles, and if it's good for my tools, it's good for my magic tools. With boiled linseed oil, you want to put a coat on heavy and then let it soak for a good 20 to 30 minutes. Come in, wipe off the excess, let it dry for at least an hour or two, ideally a full day, but that's not always the most practical way to do it. Then another coat, and you do this every single day until it stops absorbing the linseed oil. Typically takes about a week, and then from then out, at least once a year, preferably every 6 months, you put another heavy coat on, let it get absorbed for half hour or so, and then wipe off all the excess and then let it cure for at least a day, and you'll have a very, very nice finish. Not only do you get a nice sheen with it, it soaks into the wood and protects it. It'll start building up on the outside of the wood and protect it. It'll make it fairly watertight, and when you use it on tool handles, like all my axes have it, my hammers, my shovels, all of it, I put linseed oil on. There's a very low coefficient of friction between human skin and linseed oil, so you can use that all day long and not develop blisters. If you're swinging a hammer, an axe, or anything like that, and you're getting blisters, it's probably because the finish. It's more than likely it's lacquer, which is a beautiful finish, don't get me wrong, and it has its purposes. But as a handle finish, no, don't. A lot of friction between your hand and lacquer, and that creates heat, and that creates blisters. So, for the next week or so, I'll be working on putting boiled linseed oil on this guy, And then when that's all done, in this little handle section here, I'll get some really thin leather and just put a couple wraps around, just to give you something a little bit different to hold on to, get a little better hold on it. And then I can use this as a hiking stick. I can go out into the woods, hike with this, and when it's ready to lay down an offering, do a ritual or whatever, my staff's ready to go. So I have my staff for here at the house, I got my staff for traveling, and if need be, magic wand. Now, as I said, this is I got a squeaky floor. This is the first in a whole line of videos I want to put together on doing crafting for the faith. I will be doing blacksmithing. This is actually the first knife I ever made. I made it from a file. This is my FMA. And then I made the sheath for it and the handle and all that. So we'll cover blacksmithing at some point. I also did oath rings. So we'll do those. We'll probably do like a general blacksmithing and then some of the more specific items. Also, we'll do some more carvings, like the little figures I've done. Maybe I can get Pooch from Nordic Wolf Custom Carvings to help out on that video. And then there's a lot to cover with crafts. There's an infinite number of things that you can do. Custom candles. You can do spell candles. And that might be a fun one to do. I can get my fiance to help out with that one. But if there's anything else craft-wise that you'd like to see covered, if you have any questions or anything, leave a comment down below. I'd be happy to answer any of your questions. If I don't know, then I'll find out and let you know. The whole point of me doing this entire YouTube channel is to learn. So we can do that together. If there's something you want to see done, let me know, and we can cover that. If you want me to do some work with rituals, prayers, spells, happy to do that too. Get some other people in on the channel that can help out. My fiance is into this stuff as well, not on the Norse side, more on the Celtic, but a lot of the general principles still hold, and have many other friends who are into this stuff. Some have been practicing for a very long time. Some even own wood shops. A good friend of mine, Michelle, owns the Nature's Touch down in Gettysburg. Wonderful wood shop. Definitely, if you're ever in Gettysburg, you have to go check it out. They have a huge Norse section, which is pretty rare. Usually they got some stuff, but Nature's Touch has big Norse section. Have her on the show sometime too. But that's all I have for you tonight. This is a relatively short one, but I want to go over my staff and some of the things I've learned on it and kick off this whole crafting series. So please like, subscribe, leave a comment down below, and I'll continue doing this stuff. So until next time, goodbye.